So I want to think about jobs to be done as a way to be a little bit more precise about how we're looking at the opportunities and which ideas we should move on and act on, because there's some uncertainty there and there's risk, particularly from the stakeholder side. So I want to talk to you about some of the processes and techniques that we're still working on. So this is very much a work in progress, but that we've based on the concept of jobs to be done. And that comes from Clayton Christensen, the father of disruption and disruptive innovation. And he writes in this article here called Marketing Malpractice, he writes, "The job, not the customer, is the fundamental unit of analysis for a marketer who hopes to develop products that customers will buy." So what he's saying is we need to focus not on the demographics, but rather what people are trying to get done and their goals. I just want to read a couple more passages from this article. I'm going to be referring to them later, so I want to set the scene a little bit more here. And he writes, to build brands that mean something to customers, you have to attach them to products that mean something to customers. And to do that, you need to segment markets in ways that reflect how customers actually live their lives. The great Harvard marketing professor Theodore Levitt used to tell his students, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And every marketer we know agrees with Levitt's insight, yet these same people segment their markets by type of drill and by price point. They measure market share of drills, not of holes. They benchmark the features and functions of their drill, not their hole, against those of rivals, right? And there is a better way to think about market segmentation and new product innovation. The structure of a market, seen from the customer's point of view, is very simple. They just need to get things done, as Ted Levitt said. When people find themselves needing to get a job done, they essentially hire products to do that job for them. Since most new product developers don't think in those terms, they've become much too good at creating products that don't help customers do the jobs they need to get done. So that was written almost a decade ago from one of the leading business thinkers in the field, but I think it rings true for a lot of user experience designers, hopefully, in the room. Focus on the goals. Sophia was talking about this morning in her ecosystem design talk. And that's what we're trying to do at Citrix with a Jobs to be Done program that I want to talk to you about. Here's a process that just kind of maps out chronologically what we've done that's going to structure my talk a little bit. Starting with understanding users, then mapping the jobs to be done, looking at how we can use that to precisely identify opportunities, and then aligning efforts to that. So first up, understanding users. I don't have much here. Just this one slide. I don't want to talk about ethnographic research or contextual inquiry, which is essentially what we did. We had 39 interviews and observations, most of them on site, that we audio recorded and then transcribed those texts. So we were able to do qualitative text analysis. And at the end, we identified over 1,700 discrete tasks. And that became the basis for the Jobs to be Done map that we then created. So it started with contextual inquiry and primary user research. And this was in a domain that is of interest to Citrix. I'm going to show some examples here that aren't that domain just for illustration purposes. So I'm actually changing the domain in some of my examples. But we had defined roughly the space that we wanted to investigate. And then we created a map of the jobs to be done. And we believe that a mental model diagram is such a map. And if you don't know mental model diagrams, there's a book by Indy Young. She pioneered this technique and detailed it very explicitly in the book Mental Models. And she writes, a mental model helps you visualize how your business strategy looks compared to the existing user experience. Thus, it is a diagram that can support your experience strategy. If you don't know what a mental model diagram looks like, this is a close-up of a piece of the mental model diagram. I'll show you the much bigger one in a second. So this has to do with behavioral modeling, right? It's not visual in terms of a diagram or interlocking circles like we saw this morning from Fabio. It's much more text-based, but it's what I consider a map of all the jobs to be done that we discovered in our research. This is, again, a hypothetical example of the domain of photography, and this is one portion of photography of jobs to be done. And the way this is organized is hierarchical. So you have down here the atomic tasks that are then organized into towers that are then organized into goal spaces. right? So one of the goals within the field of photography is finding photos, and we were able to map out all the jobs that we found through our user research. In this technique, you can then map your features and services and products and see how you support customers in getting their jobs done. So here's one of the first diagrams that we came up with. We took it into a workshopping situation with our stakeholders. And what this represents to me are essentially here, this top part of the diagram here, our towers is a hierarchical arrangement view of the jobs to be done. And down below, we mapped our products and services to see how we were meeting users' needs or not. In a second step, we then mapped future concepts back to this mental model diagram. This is too small on purpose because I didn't want to reveal the data here. But essentially, you see that tower structure. These are our jobs to be done, mapped out into the different goal spaces here. These are our current products and services. And below that, we mapped some future possibilities. And these came from a series of design thinking activities where we were looking at new products and services that we could offer customers to support them in their jobs to be done. So we had those three layers, what customers are currently experiencing, what we currently offer, and what we could potentially offer in the future. And this provides some insight in and of itself, and Indy Young talks about this in the book. For instance, over here, you'll see we don't currently offer anything, and we actually came up with no concepts around that as well, too. That's a potential opportunity. But we could also say, well, maybe there's a reason that we're not doing that or that we didn't think about that. So we don't necessarily know if that's an opportunity or not. Here's another interesting area. We currently don't have anything, but we came up with a slew of concepts around there, too, as well. So in the next step, what we did was we tried to identify the opportunities. And we used a method outlined by Tony Ulwick. It's detailed in this article, Turn Customer Input into Innovation. He also wrote a book called What Customers Want, and he has a very specific method for leveraging jobs to be done to point to innovation opportunities. His company, Stratagen, which I think is based in Colorado, I'm not sure. It is, yes, okay, in Aspen. I think that's where he is. But their service that they offer as a consulting firm centers on jobs to be done. So they take jobs to be done very seriously, and they've almost in a scientific way come up with a method to pinpoint opportunity. And here's how it works. In theory, what you want to look for are jobs that are important to customers. So you want to measure the importance of that job to users. And on a second dimension, you want to look at their current satisfaction in getting that job done. And this isn't satisfaction with Citrix products or any product. This is at any tool or means that they have at their disposal. And what that does is it gives us a much smaller target. Because what we can then zoom in on, and here's the key, what we can zoom in on are those jobs that are important to customers, but they're currently not being satisfied with. Right? And that, the innovation has always an unpredictable element to it. So we're not saying this is foolproof, but what it does is it makes our target a lot smaller. So even if we miss the board, we're still constricted to a much a smaller range of possibilities, and the chance of success in innovation is higher. And that's what Tony Ulwick has proven in his writings and in his consulting engagements. So we wanted to use this approach and the research that we currently did to help us prioritize our concepts. And here's how it works. You need to generate what are called desired outcome statements. Okay? So from the mental model diagram and from our user research, we were able to look at what the outcome was. And the outcome is the measure of success that a person has for getting a job done. Right? So after they complete a job, they have jobs to be done. After they complete that, how are they going to measure success? And there's a very normalized format that Tony Ulwick prescribes in his method. And it goes like this. You start with a verb that shows direction of the goal. Do you want to minimize something, reduce something, or do you want to increase it or maximize it? So most of these statements begin with one of those four verbs. And next you have the unit of the focus. What are you trying to move up or down? Right, your goal. So in this case, you want to minimize effort. It could also be things like time, access, ability. And then you have a qualifying action. Right? So from our research and our job map, we were able to generate, I think we had about 40 or 50 of these statements. in a normalized format, and that's very important for consistency in data, because after the qualitative research, we then did a quantitative survey. We had hundreds of people, I think 300 or 400 people, I'm not quite sure what the sample size was. It was fairly large, and we essentially gave them each of these desired outcome statements and asked them 2 questions. How important is this to you? Scale of 1 to 10. And how well is it currently being satisfied? Scale of 1 to 10. And from all of that, you're able to calculate what's called an opportunity score. And again, this is a calculation from Tony Ulwick's method. And it goes like this. You look at the importance score, scale of 1 to 10, and you add that to the satisfaction gap. And the satisfaction gap is importance minus satisfaction. Right? So in this case, we had a score of 9 and a satisfaction of 3. So the satisfaction gap is 9 minus 3, or 6. So we take importance, 9, plus that 6, and we get a score of 15, which is actually very high. I wish I had more 15s in this research. But after looking at all of those statements and quantifying which ones are least satisfied, those are the unmet needs that point to a higher chance of success in terms of innovation. We were able to then zoom in. Going back to this map, we were then able to zoom in on the areas that we believed had higher chance of success. And it turned out that this cluster was one of the higher areas that we wanted to focus on. I don't know if that's actually second or last there. I'm just kind of for illustration purposes, showing that we were actually able to overlay that back onto our jobs map and then zoom in on the areas of higher opportunity. So, quote from a product lead. It's great to have this information to make informed decisions. I'm looking forward to incorporating it more and more. And I kind of want to emphasize maybe the more and more part of this too, because uptake was not immediate and it wasn't widespread. But we are kind of pearl growing this internally, and we get more and more interest as we've been doing this. We've done this in 2 other domains. So right now we're looking at 3 different domains that are of interest to Citrix that we've done this technique with. The research, the job mapping, and then the opportunity scores. And we're using this in different ways to help prioritize our efforts in a strategic way. So here are some of the outcomes. So obviously, one of the big focuses was concepts. What are we going to do to improve our product and services or to innovate? But we're also looking at things like messaging and looking at some differentiators, where we differentiate ourselves from competitors. So first of all, the concepts, as I mentioned, we had some design thinking activities. A lot of sketching came out of that. But what we were able to do is, instead of saying, do we want to go for concept A or B that were in completely different areas, we were able to look at alternatives within a more focused area. So we were able to go with those concepts and alternatives deeper in a confined area. We were also able to use the desired outcomes as heuristics. So if we had alternatives, we could say, does this hurt or help the desired outcome? There is one concept that we have queued up in the App Store. It's an app. I was hoping it would have been launched by this conference. Unfortunately, it's not launched. We're actually in the process of applying for a patent. That was one of the first concepts that came out of this. So I don't know if the first ideas that we put through this will succeed or not. But what it did is it gave us, the design team, a lot of confidence to move forward with that over other ideas. And I think it also helped, talking with stakeholders, address their concerns about uncertainty as well, too. We're also working with our marketing team to look at messaging and to reframe and reorder messaging to speak to the customer's needs, but more specifically to speak to the customer's unmet needs. So for instance, this is made up, instead of saying our automated photo indexing is the best in the industry, say find photos on your computer with less effort, thanks to our smart indexing. So we're taking those desired outcome statements and embedding them in the marketing messages almost directly. Oh, and by the way, we tried to keep the language of the user all through this process, right? So the map that we made of the jobs to be done in the desired outcome statement used the language of the user throughout. So we believe not only will these speak to the users because they represent unmet needs, we're actually using their language more. And finally, we're looking at jobs to be done as a way to look at our differentiators. And that quote that I read from Clayton Christensen about benchmarking yourself against rivals, not in terms of features or price points, but by how well you fulfill or satisfy jobs, right? I kind of took that to heart. This is a super work in progress. But what I've done is along the bottom, again, these are hypotheticals, taking some of those desired outcomes or jobs to be done and looking how we perform against competitors. And that's what these lines represent. Here I just have us and them and the other guys for now. But what we're trying to do is look at relative performance, not against features, but against how we're satisfying jobs to be done. And I think, it's a little hard to get this picture. I'm not quite sure where the data is going to come from. It might just be intuitive for now. But I think what this picture, though, does is I think it points to a different way of looking at competitors. And I think that's the importance of this thinking. Oh, by the way, before I go to the next slide, we're also talking to our pricing team to see how pricing packaging can be informed by this information as well, too. Because when you talk about packaging and pricing price points, this information could be very informative. But what I think this does is it reframes what a competitor is. It reframes our notion of a next best alternative. Here's a great quote from Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, the makers of tax software. And this is quoted in the book, The Myths of Innovation. And he writes, "The greatest competitor in tax software was not the industry, it was the pencil. The pencil is a tough and resilient substitute, yet the entire industry had overlooked it." So when you're doing your taxes, you have a job to be done. I have to calculate a figure, right? I can use a calculator. I can use tax software. I can also use a pencil, right? So if you focus on the job to be done, the pencil competes with tax software. And that's what he realized. He realized for massive uptake of Intuit software, he needed to be better than a pencil, right? And I think this is a point, too, that Rita Gunther McGrath makes in her book, The End of Competitive Advantage. Great strategy book, by the way. I highly recommend it. But she talks about instead of sustainable competitive advantage, we need to be looking at transient advantage. And I think some of the themes we heard this morning around seismic shifts in the market, how do we deal with that? How do we approach that? And she says we need to be thinking about arenas, not market segmentation by demographics, but arenas. So she talks about looking at the market by arenas, and she writes, "The driver of this categorization will in all likelihood be the outcomes that particular customers seek, their jobs to be done, and the alternative ways those outcomes might be met," right? So I think moving forward, I think this is a forward-looking strategy book. We need to be thinking not about market segments, but around jobs to be done, looking at things like arenas. So by focusing on jobs to be done, we were able to identify opportunities, we believe, and align various efforts, not just product design efforts, but various efforts around the prioritization that we came up with. And kind of as a future piece, helping us redefine markets and redefining who our competitors are.